if everybody can ask somebody they know to come with them next week, we should be able to have a minyan. We had 7. Well, will you sponsor? Okay, I'll speak to the powers that be. Anyway, but for a quick Devar Torah, at least, and by the way, davening tonight, Mincha is at 4:35. Tomorrow morning we're davening at 6:15, 6:50, and 7:50. But for a quick Devar Torah, at least we can get that. We're starting Parshat Shmot this week, the Sefer Shmot. And, our history can be related, our history in exile can be related to what happened to us in Egypt. The Jews went to Egypt. Paro welcomed us with open arms because Yosef, the great hero of Egypt, was one of us. And everything looked really great by the end of last week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, it says a new Paro came to power, and he either didn't know about Yosef or he made himself that he didn't know. The fact is that all the good we had done for Egypt, they said, forget it, we don't care. You are a threat to us, which, by the way, is the history of almost every exile we've experienced. The Jews were invited in, they were helpful, and then the government turned on us, as it were, in many different forms. And you always use the same excuse. They're plotting with our enemies to take over the country. The Soviet Union said the Jews were a 5th column, but we don't want them to leave because that would be a failure of the Soviet Union. Same thing, Egypt was the same thing. The Jews are a 5th column, but we don't want them to leave because it's a danger to us. So we'll make them into slaves. And the way that Paro did it was very interesting. He didn't just one day come down and say the Jews are going to be slaves, they're going to go into Goshen and just make them into slaves. He tricked the Jews, as it were, into becoming slaves by saying it's National Help Build a Pyramid Day. Everybody has to go and help build the pyramids. And the Jews want to be good citizens. They didn't want to be left out. So they went and helped build the pyramids. One day, 2 days. Then one day, as the Jews were getting ready to leave after their voluntary work, the Egyptian army was there saying, you're not leaving, you're now slaves. So there's a certain lesson in that. The idea is that no matter how good the government is to the Jews throughout its history, at a certain point, they will look out for themselves. We forget that they're not in it to help us. They're in it for their own purpose. And if they perceive us as an enemy, they will treat us as an enemy. And if you look out through Jewish history, the Jews were invited into Poland originally. And then we know the history of Poland and the Jews. The Jews were welcomed into Germany, into France, and all these places. And yet, at a certain point, the governments turned against us for their own purpose. In many cases, it was they wanted our money, etc. So the lesson in this is you don't rely on others. As you know, in Israel, there's a very, Israel relies on the United States for weaponry, for a lot of help. But there's one thing Israel does not take from the United States. That's American soldiers. The only soldiers who serve in Israel are Israeli soldiers. Because when push comes to shove, we have nobody else but ourselves. Something to think about, and no Kaddish Rabbanim.